So I grew up in a household immersed with the Spanish culture and the language, and I loved it. Now, when I got to my first day of high school Spanish class, I sat down, excited to learn, and my teacher goes, "Girls, why don't we go around the room and say why you're here today? Why are you taking Spanish as your foreign language?" Girls start going around the room, and they start saying things like, "I was forced to be here. Spanish is the easiest language," or "I didn't feel like taking Latin." So when it got to me, it was awkward to say that I wanted to be there, and I was excited to learn. After the class was over, I walked out, and I was wondering, why did this happen? And I realized it's because of a huge concept that most of you don't even know of, yet you're all a part of. And this concept is called English superiority. An example of English superiority is a child who grows up in a house where there's only English being spoken. Now, this child goes on to elementary school and middle school with only English being spoken to this child with no influences of any other languages. So this kid grows up thinking that all he needs to know is English and doesn't feel the need of another language. And I mean, nowadays you're able to go anywhere in the world and there's bound to be somebody who can speak English. But how did English get everywhere? Well, in the 17th and 18th century, there was something called the Age of Exploration. And so countries were scrambling to get land because with this land, they were able to have more colonies. And with more colonies was more people, and with more people was more power to the country. Now, Britain played a huge role in this. In fact, Britain played a huge role in this. In fact, at one point, Britain had 23% of the world's population under their power. And Britain was able to get a lot of power from these people. Britain would go to these countries and they would force them to learn English, which, flash forward to today, 83 countries have English as its primary language, and 105 other countries/regions have English as one of its main languages. So by the time that we get to here today, so with the 105 languages, that's a lot. Now, here's a little side note. A language to a culture or country is very important because it's what holds its culture together. For example, China isn't famous for speaking Italian. They're famous for speaking Chinese. Sweden is famous for speaking Icelandic, but they're famous for speaking Swedish. So let's say an example where a country was to lose their language. It would be devastating. And they would lose their sense of culture and their sense of pride for the country. And so what was to happen if the opposite happened? A country was to gain more speakers and more people and more culture. And now what I believe is that we've gained a lot of pride, but I believe that we've gained a little bit too much pride. And let me ask you a question. Do you feel as if learning a second language, you lose a sense of your patriotic pride? Now let's get into some data. There are the 3 most known languages in the world. English is 3rd, Spanish is 2nd, and Chinese is 1st. Now, I just said that Chinese is the 1st most known language, yet from a young age, Chinese students are required to learn English, yet I'm an English speaker and I'm not required to learn Chinese. So about 600 million people are learning English today, and 200 to 350 million of those people are from China, according to a Cambridge study. So I was wondering how they felt about being forced to learn English. And I'm lucky to go to a school where we host international students. And one of the students, Jinsing, she's a freshman, and she grew up in China. And I asked her, how is your Spanish class? Was it easy or was it hard? And she told me that the class was hard due to the difficult grammar, reading, and pronunciation of the English language. I then asked her, how did she feel about being forced to learn English? And she said that she didn't feel as if she was forced. She felt as if there was a need to learn English because it was everywhere, and America is a huge force. And she is right, America is a huge force, but we are lacking in our foreign language education system today. In fact, Secretary Arne Duncan said at the Foreign Language Summit that the United States is a long way from being a multilingual society that many of our economic competitors are today. So America is the biggest country with English as its first primary language. So if we are teaching children, if we have bad education system with our children with foreign languages, we're basically telling them that it's okay that you don't need to know another language. We're the biggest country and we have a huge force, so why is the need? So in America, we also have the requirement in high school about to take 2 years of foreign language. But I believe that the reason why we also may be lacking is because in high school, it's too late, due to the fact of something called the critical age hypothesis. The critical age hypothesis is basically a hypothesis that states that after the age of puberty, age 12, it is hard and sometimes very difficult for the brain to deal with learning a second language. So if you start high school at age 14, there's some clashes right there. And in fact, in an article written by Penn State, it states that the critical age hypothesis states that there is a critical age before puberty that one must learn a language. And if one has not learned how to speak this language before puberty, it is sometimes difficult and sometimes impossible to learn this language and speak it in a meaningful way. So as I said, that once we get to high school, we have these teenagers learning this language and getting frustrated. And I'm a teenager, I can say this. Whenever I'm frustrated, I get angry. And whenever I'm angry, I blame something. And what's the first to blame? The first to blame is, why learn the language if I'm not going to go to this country? Why learn the language if I'm not going to live there when I get older? But that's the one thing, ladies and gentlemen, that our education systems today are forgetting to teach us. Is that you don't need to learn a language because you're planning on traveling to this country, but to learn a language so that we can have a sense of a world culture, a sense of you can learn somebody else's culture and you can identify with somebody just across the world. And that is what the systems are forgetting to teach us today. And since they don't, now we just have frustrated teenagers stuck in classes. So, I wondered if this affected my high school, and at a poll that I conducted at a Northwestern all-girl Ohio high school, 82% of the girls said that they enjoyed taking the Spanish class, or taking the foreign language class. 57% said that they would they are taking the class because they wanted to and not because they were forced. And another 72% of the people taking a foreign language class said that they would still take it, even if it wasn't mandatory. Now, that was probably really confusing, that what I just said didn't support what I just said, what I stated previously, but it's to tell you that a small number doesn't generate a big number. And although it's not happening, and I'm very happy that it's not happening at my high school, that English superiority is happening across the world, mostly in America. Now, it's time to give you some bad news. What is our future if we continue on this path? And our future with this doesn't look too good if you don't want English to be the only language left. We can see English being the only language left due to 3 reasons. Reason number 1, technology. Now, today, you are able to put on headphones where I can say something to you in English and it spits out German within the next second. So if we have this, then English speakers will continue to grow up thinking that there is no need to learn another language because we have all this technology, so why bother? Reason number 2, according to the UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization, they state that by the end of the century, we will have lost a lot of languages. And so metaphorically, we are losing a language every 14 days. So if you do the math and you keep on crossing off, there's soon to be a day where we are left with one language, and I believe that is to be English due to my 3rd reason, the power of our language. The English language is called the world language, the business language, and the universal language. French used to be called the world language, but as you can tell, English knocked that right off the table. And because of that, now more and more people are starting to learn English, which causes, again, more people thinking that there is no need to learn another language because everybody knows English. But we can change this because there's 2 things that you can do. You can teach and you can learn. Teach others what I have told you. Teach our new generations Tell them that you don't need to learn a language because you're planning on going to this country or that you're planning on living there, but to be able to learn some new culture, be able to identify, who knows, there could be somebody just like you across the world, but a language barrier is what is holding you guys together. And to learn. Go out and learn a language. Go out and learn Swedish and go and talk to somebody in Swedish. Because I want to leave you off with this question. And think about it. How would you feel if hundreds and hundreds of years from now, widely spoken languages like today, like French and German, are foreign memories and are gone? How would that make you feel? Thank you for listening to me.